Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today is my August wrap-up. For August, I managed to read 6 books, and I can't really believe it's September already. That makes 10 months now that I've been on BookTube, and it's been great. And especially with, I feel like towards when it gets like fall and stuff, especially in the winter, I tend to read more because I stay inside more. But for this month, I know I already talked about one book out of the 6 that I read this month in my last video, and that was For the Time Being by Annie Dillard. So I won't talk about this one too much since I already talked about it, but I thought this was good. I'm a Dillard fan, but with this one, it was a bit too much in the philosophical realm for me. I prefer nonfiction through memoir or some personal essays. So this wasn't my exact wheelhouse for what I was looking for, but always appreciate it. And I actually think I have a friend that I think will enjoy this, so I might recommend it to him. The second book I read this month was Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay by Elena Ferrante, the third book in the Neapolitan novel series. And this one I thought was great. It's weird, this momentum with this series. I expected it to like die down or something, but this one is like nearly as good as the second one. When I actually bought the fourth book, I think I mentioned that in my last video too, but I'm so excited to read that and to finish this series. I'll be sad when it's over, but I'm definitely going to read more of Ferrante's other works, more of her slimmer works. But with this, it continues the story where it leaves off, which I really can't say much about because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But our main character here, Elena Greco, I love that we get to know more about her own desires and wants and how she defines herself now that she's in her 20s, along with Lila, and sort of how their relationship builds. And really for me, the last maybe 150 pages or so, they were just so like streamlined. Like I just kept flipping through pages. I wanted to know more every time, and I'm just so happy with it's so rewarding reading this series. There's actually already one book I already forgot to mention that I read this month because it was kind of forgettable to me, and also because I decided to donate my copy to the library, but that was On Beauty by Zadie Smith. So I've read NW or Northwest by Zadie Smith a few years ago, and it wasn't really my jam. With On Beauty, I did like it a lot more, although with this book is about like a family drama. That's like the best encompassing way I can talk about it. And there were great highs, but then there were some awful lows. This book, I would say, a lot of people are describing it as political, and I agree. And I think it does it. I think Zadie Smith talks about culture and things like that in a very organic way, so it doesn't feel forced on you. I know that's like a thing that readers they become aware of or have trouble with. It's not that they necessarily don't mind being enlightened by, you know, having different characters of different viewpoints, but just the idea of if the message becomes too clear. And in a way, I feel like with this book, it did that for me a little. I feel like, you know, I always want to be learning more about what I can learn from reading from fictional characters and how to empathize more with other people. But with this one, I feel like some of the themes were a bit too heavy-handed, and it felt like this book was doing like a checklist. Sometimes these characters were just interchangeable to me. Like I feel like they didn't have very defining characteristics other than, I would say, the daughter, and then also there's a classmate kind of that the kids have, the children of this family have, and he pops up every now and then, and so I liked getting, whenever he was in the pages, I really liked that. But with the highs, I really enjoy how Zadie Smith writes. I feel like I wasn't exposed to her greatest ability of writing with NW and Northwest. I just couldn't grapple with it. But with this whole family drama, that's not the right word, but just this family story narrative, I really liked it. But a lot of the things that I could have expected that would happen with these characters did happen. I also love the academic sort of glimpse in this book because it deals with sort of academic life and sort of highbrow culture, so I thought that was interesting. But Zadie Smith doesn't make it pretentious either, which I think is good. But the lows for me is that when it came to like conflict in this book, or some of the dialogue also, it was just too much. It was so melodramatic for me, and it sort of zapped me out of the story. Another book I read this month is Someday This Pain Will Be Useful to You by Peter Cameron. And with this book, I feel, I don't think people say this anymore, but put on blast. And with this is literally like me as a teenager. This is a story about a boy named James who's apparently has a ticket to Brown University when he starts school in the fall. But this is a story set in the summer in between his final summer of boyhood or adolescence, I guess. And he is a privileged white boy because his mother owns a gallery in New York City, and they seem to be living pretty well. James just has all this time to think about how life is pretty, not meaningless, but he definitely gets existential thoughts. And he loves to sort of, you know, remind us as the reader that he doesn't interact with people very well. He's kind of socially inept. But I don't know, with this book, I think I would have loved this whenever I was younger and sort of looking for a bridge into literary fiction. I think that's what this book would be good for. But again, thinking of dialogue, it seems to be my issue this month, is that there's literally a part in here, the dialogue I don't think is very natural. James has a sister, and there's this point where the family was having like a fight, I guess, or something, and the sister says, "It feels like we're in an after-school special." I literally don't know any teenager that would say that verbally, especially around their family, or I don't know, it just felt very forced. And then also, just anytime James interacts with another character, especially with a therapist that he sees, all of these characters are literally just asking James questions. That way he has a reason to say what is on his mind. And I don't like whenever characters are just made just to do that for the main character. I feel like this book never reached its full potential. I kind of waited for, you know, that taking off point where I thought James was going to just sort of do something about his life. And I actually thought this book was going to be set at Brown University. I was really in the mood for another campus novel type of thing after reading On Beauty, and especially of thinking of other books like The Idiot by Elif Botman. Another book I read this month is Lit by Mary Karr, and so now I've officially read all of Mary Karr's series of memoir, with the first one being The Liars Club, the second one is Cherry, and then now this final one. I will say that I really loved this one. This is, it's weird because I never thought one could beat The Liars Club, because with The Liars Club, Mary Karr does an excellent job at taking the perspective back to her childhood and taking the agency of her girlhood when she was younger, and even her father addressing her as Pokey whenever she's younger, because that was her nickname. So often in The Liars Club, that's how Karr is referred to. So Karr is clearly an adult writing from her past self as a child. But in Lit, it's a bit different, because this is obviously Karr's most recent attachment to her memories based on her life, because this book covers a lot of her career life, like as an academic, whenever she goes to Syracuse, and then also her marriage, and just the way, and of course motherhood too as well, but the way Karr just writes about her life is engaging because she knows how to pick and pull at her life and poke at it. She doesn't dwell, well she does, but she does it in a way where it's still inviting for us as readers. And there are parts in here where she directly even talks to us, or she at least knows we're here reading about her life. And the introduction to this book is actually a letter addressed to her son, just warning him, you know, this is my life, and you may not know these parts of me, but this is who I am. So it's really no secret either that Karr sort of adopts sort of this spiritual life, and how that sort of gets her through her life towards the most recent way of us knowing her, maybe through interviews and other publications online. So this is sort of like a catch-up to her life as well. But she just writes with such relentless honesty, and I really do see the connections of where she talks about writing memoir in her book, The Art of Memoir, and how she also writes about that stuff in here. So any memoir fans, I highly recommend this. I actually just highly recommend Mary Karr in general. I really think you should read her if you haven't already, if you appreciate memoir. And the last book to talk about this month is Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer, and as soon as I finished this book, I immediately wanted to reread it again, mainly because of two parts. And the first part is because it was a little tricky to understand the multiple narratives, but the second part is because this feels like such a complete work. it feels finished and it feels very impressive knowing that Foer wrote this when I think he was 25. This is a story about a character also named Jonathan Safran Foer who's trying to find out more about his family lineage and sort of his ancestry concerning the Holocaust. And there's another character in here named Alex who serves as Jonathan Safran Foer's translator whenever they're both writing their own separate works that inspire each other. And with the narratives I mentioned, one narrative does take place from Jonathan Safran Foer's perspective as he's writing this novel, inspired by his family. The second narrative is Alex writing his own sort of chronicling his own journey whenever Jonathan Safran Foer comes to visit him and they're trying to discover more about Jonathan Safran Foer's family. And then the last narrative is a series of letters, mainly Alex writing letters to Jonathan Safran Foer about Jonathan Safran Foer's writing. So again, just a little reminder here, because now when I say it all out loud, it does sound confusing, but Jonathan Safran Foer here is also a character in the book, so it's not really addressing the real author here. I think, only reading 2 works by Foer, this one and then Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, I think Foer does a great job at writing whenever he puts limitations on his characters. By that I mean is that with Alex in this book, where he's not very good at English, but he's still well enough to be a translator, is that whenever we get to read his letters, they're a bit charming because he says some offhanded things that we know is funny as English readers. And similarly with Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, that book takes perspective of, I think, a 9-year-old boy named Oscar Schell, and so clearly, from the perspective of a child, things become a bit lost in translation, so to speak, with us as a reader, but also with the other characters involved. Another staple from what I can gather is that Foer loves to write about sort of these connecting storylines or different narratives, and they all seem to be characters concerned with love, grief, and loss. But I eat that stuff up, and I just, with this book, I will admit, it seems like a lot of people cite this book as, pretty pretentious, given sort of the narrative gimmicks, as well as, maybe some flowery language at some parts. But where we do have these pop-ups of charming things and humor from these characters that do have limitations, I think Foer does understand keeping that balance and not to get sort of carried away. Also to me, this totally reads like having a classmate that writes at Starbucks and always talks about Proust or something. None of that is bad, but it's just, that staple writer. When you just think of one, I think that's who Jonathan Safran Foer is. But I really love his writing. I'm a Foer fan, and now I'm even more excited to read the other book I have by him, Here I Am. So that was my August wrap-up. Please let me know if you've read any of these books. I would love to know what you think. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.